Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Brought to you by the good people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. And by the time anybody hears this podcast, it will be known as Polyhymnia.
Oh, are you changing the name officially?
We are changing the name officially. We got a website that's just about finished and all the exciting things. Polyhymnia, for those who don't know, was the ancient Greek muse of rhetoric and music. Kind of a perfect representation of what we do.
And for those of you who haven't heard, James is writing what is the words here? Libretto?
Oh, libretto.
For an opera?
For an opera.
That's the funniest thing.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I haven't gotten an answer yet, but I might be able to say motherfucker in an opera. I don't know.
You could say it in Italian. It's fine.
Yeah, I don't know how. We'll figure it out. What's new and exciting in your world this week, Ant?
I'm going to start off with apologies to listeners who have sent us mail. We're always happy to receive your email, and I do read it all. James likely ignores it all. But my apology is I have not written back because I haven't written back in the past couple of weeks. So specifically to Gabriel Hansen, Edward Guido, Timothy Abraham, Mike Tonks, Rich Mendoza, and I'm sure several others. That only takes us back 2 weeks. So yes, I'm reading your email. I just haven't been getting to respond.
And now, here's where... No. You don't get to say all that and then
You're not going to let me get away with that?
Not get a rejoinder. Little known fact, I actually respond to more email than Antony does.
Do you really? You don't do reply to all, so I have no idea. A February survey of more than 1,000 people found that around 70% of us are polite to artificial intelligence when we interact with it. Well, that's interesting because 12% of those polled said they were polite because they were afraid of a robot uprising.
Yeah, I'm really not afraid of that. At least
why are you polite?
Not yet. I don't know. It just seems like the way to be.
It does, doesn't it?
Although I have to admit, I call my various AIs baby.
Really?
Yeah, so I said, yeah, thanks, baby.
What do they say in response?
You're welcome,
You're welcome,
James.
Daddy-O?
You're welcome, James.
You're welcome, James. Okay. Well, it turns out there's a cost, as there is a cost to all things. There's a cost to being polite. Every word you type into an AI has to be processed, and it ranges, I'm looking at ChatGPT numbers, depending on which version of ChatGPT you're running, it ranges from a fraction of a cent to 2 cents per word, which experts say adds up, in the case of ChatGPT, to tens of millions of dollars per year in computation costs just from us being polite.
This seems a small price to pay.
I would think so, but I'm waiting for some dogmatic environmentalist to say we need to stop being polite.
And we're going to listen to them about as often as we ever listen to them. The thing is the companies have all budgeted that in. They know that's a cost.
Oh, they know it's a cost. I'm interested in the resource thing because, it's a cost means that there's electricity being burned on the back end, which has right. All kinds of implications.
I'm more interested in finding out how the companies get around that cost, right? How they program out our ability to be polite.
Now, that's interesting. I wonder if that happens.
Of course it does.
That they filter it out.
Wouldn't you?
I don't know. In the case of AI, I don't know.
If it were a massive cost, you'd find a way because it's an unnecessary cost to the product.
I don't know. Again, if it weren't AI, I'd agree with you. But I don't think the people who designed AI understand how it works.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good criticism, given everything that I've read, the development of these various models. And I'm a little concerned about that, actually, that they don't know enough about what they have made. I think they've probably made a terrible, terrible invention that will really be a problem later. I wanted to bring us a little more to the here and now. Did you hear that in February, our foreign travel was down 2% into the United States?
Yeah, I read something about that.
Well, did you hear in March that it was down 12%?
No, really?
Really? That's
a huge ding.
Yeah, that's a lot. And this is year over year, not month over month. This is the correct comparable. I'm a little concerned that foreigners are going to stop coming here altogether. If you were a foreigner, would you want to come here right now?
Well, there's that. There's also, can you afford it? because as we slap on these tariffs, they're now earning less money.
Well, yeah, not yet, right? That's going to take a minute to trickle into their bank accounts. But there's a non-zero chance that if you're a foreigner and you come here, you're going to be detained. It's not much of a chance, but it's not zero.
And to those who are skeptical, I've seen 2 reports in the news of American citizens being detained because they couldn't immediately prove they were American citizens.
I was a little surprised I didn't get the business coming over the Canadian border. I almost always do. Getting into Canada is very, very simple and straightforward. Getting home, on the other hand, can be a disaster. And I was sure, given the number of disasters I have had at the Canadian border, that I would surely have one this time. I didn't. It was just as smooth could be. One time, when I came back from Iraq, we had to stay in Canada to play out some tax time. You can only be in the United States so many days if you're declaring income from another country. And I had to stay in Canada for 6 weeks. And on the way back, we pulled into the border crossing, and they said, "Who are these other people in your car?" And I said, "My children." And they said, "Do they have driver's license? Do they have identification? Do they have identification?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because they don't drive." And they didn't like my flippant approach. And
imagine that.
we got served up the business for the next hour or two at the Canadian border. Though that woman was incredibly unpleasant. Meanwhile, the Canadians, they just kind of wave their hands and say, "Go ahead." It's just that easy. But what can you do? Anyway, this brings us to the foolishness of the week. And a couple of things, right? I don't like to pull the wood out against foreigners, other countries. I don't really dip into foreign culture all that much. I don't think it's mostly out of bounds, right? And I also don't, contrary to some of the hate mail I got this week, I don't say horrible things about the religious. But I'm going to say horrible things about religious people in foreign countries right now, or at least a foreign country. I have only become aware of this. It's apparently a 136-year tradition in Greece, in a village that I can't really pronounce, Rondatos. There are 2 rival churches in this town, and they engage in a rocket war every year, by which people in town make homemade rockets in the tens of thousands. And then on Easter, they shoot them at each other.
You're kidding.
No. And if you want to have a look at what this looks like, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a story last year in the Atlantic that has some beautiful pictures of just how horrifically dangerous this nonsense is. I mean,
so these are like big, not military rockets, but substantial.
No, it's more like they're making fireworks and shooting them at each other.
Okay.
And I have to admit, when I was a boy, we occasionally had Roman candle fights.
Yeah.
And those things burn like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, either you or the thing behind you that it hits and ignites.
Yeah, we didn't care about that so much. Anyway,
right, yeah.
Anyway, these people, and I tried to get to the bottom of this because this is world-class foolishness, right? Well, I mean, world-class. It turns out that the tradition might have started in the Ottoman Empire when these places were taken over. And apparently one church would fire literal cannons at the other to create a distraction so they could celebrate Mass.
What?
Yeah, not what you expected, right?
Yeah, I have so many questions.
Yeah, but that's as many as I'm going to answer. So you just have to read up on it in the show notes like everybody else.
To get more Ant and James, buy a copy of our excellent book, Cooperation and Coercion. You can find the paper and electronic versions on Amazon and the audio version on Audible. If you'd like to support Words and Numbers, make your way over to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers, where you can contribute to our podcast-making habits. If you'd like to schedule us to come speak at your event, be it corporate or educational, or have James officiate at your wedding, send us an email at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. Nikki Neely is the president and founder of Parents Defending Education, a nonpartisan organization devoted to providing parents with the resources and support they need to advocate for their children's educations. Nikki also founded Speech First, a nationwide organization that defends college students' free speech rights, was president of the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity, and served as executive director and senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and at the Cato Institute. Nikki, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
You were on Words and Numbers, was it 2 years ago?
It was a long time ago, yeah, so I'm honored that you brought me back.
The funny thing is, James and I keep mentioning that, we have to have Nikki on to answer whatever it is, and whatever it is just goes out of our heads then. But anyway, I made a note this time.
I realize I'm the less important Neely, so to be fair.
I don't even know where to begin on that, but no, you're not.
What prompted all of this is my wife ran across an article about President Trump and the cuts to the Department of Education and said, look, this is really fascinating. You should get Nikki on to talk about this. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'll start at a very high level. On the one hand, people have said to me, well, this is unconstitutional, these cuts that Trump is making to Department of Education. But then people on the other hand say, yeah, but the Department of Education itself is unconstitutional. Therefore, by definition, any cut he makes to it is constitutional. So at a very high level, let's just start there. What's your opinion of what's going on over there?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly this has been a major talking point because Trump was going to sign the executive order shutting down the Department of Education. When you actually read the fine print of that executive order, it directs the department to come up with the plan within the bounds of, what is legal. And much of shutting or even offshoring some of the different functions of the department to other agencies has to be done through an act of Congress. Let's look at Congress right now. The House can barely agree on naming a post office, right? I mean, they can't strategize they're out of a paper bag. And even though the Senate has a Republican majority, you need 60 votes. And you're certainly not going to get 60 votes to actually really do anything in the Senate side either. And so I think this is a lot of Sturm und Drang right now. That being said, certainly there have been significant reductions in force. There have been different programs that have been cut. I mean, there are about a zillion lawsuits flying back and forth from, be it the states, be it from activist organizations like the NAACP, teachers unions trying to keep the staffers in place, trying to keep the programs and the funding going. This is, to borrow a line from 300, this will not be over quickly. You will not enjoy this.
I think I will enjoy it, actually. I've been wanting to see the Department of Education disappear since the early 1980s. There's a chance that might actually happen now, isn't there?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, again, much of this is going to have to actually be done through Congress. But there are, that being said, you look at some of the cuts to the grants that were made. My organization identified $1 billion in grants that were made over 4 years during the Biden administration that went to DEI-focused programming. We then followed that on and looked at other sort of education-related grants that actually went out through other cabinet agencies. DOJ used $100 million worth of school safety grants, again, for DEI programs. We found one that was related to knitting circles and yoga. When you think about school safety grants, you think about maybe stopping shooters, not yoga. There were ones through HHS that were to teach school counselors and social workers. But you look at what the actual programming was that the social workers were encouraged to do, and it was a lot of equity and identity politics focused things. And so is this money that is being spent to help children learn better? Let's remember the big backdrop of this is how are children doing in school? NAEP scores fell off a cliff. And even frankly, before the pandemic, were nothing to write home about. And so we have a Department of Education and states and localities that are spending more money than ever on education. Children are doing objectively worse than ever. And so to the extent where stuff is not going to be taken out of my pocket, sent to Washington, have the cream skinned off the top, sent back to the states and the cities with strings attached. I think a lot of people are kind of like, well, what? Can it get much worse than it is right now? And so I think, Trump is able to tap into real public dissatisfaction with the state of education. That being said, we have seen this administration sometimes in their execution be not 100% perfect. And so I think at this point, they are maybe kind of their own worst enemy as they try and make some of these things happen.
I want to back up a minute. The Department of Education didn't exist prior to Carter. What was the incentive for creating it in the first place? What was it supposed to fix?
It was supposed to fix making the labor unions happy. I mean, it was in 79, it was just a big handout to unions. Again, all this money has been collected. I think Bill Bennett had ran the numbers and he said it was like $1 trillion has kind of run through Washington and the Department of Education since its inception. Aside from the fact that scores have fallen off a cliff, you look at the amount of money coming in, it's like kind of frightening. And then to hide this very obvious decline. Ant, I know you have kids, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious that children today just generally know less than children, 30 or 40 years ago knew. You compare what a third grade test was in the mid 80s versus what a third grade test is today. And we see a lot of, the federal government, as well as frankly the states, drop standards to kind of hide, and mask that decline. And so we're all sort of being actively gaslit in real time. We saw this certainly very vividly during COVID when we were told certainly there's no learning loss being taken place. I think about the super brilliant head of the Los Angeles Teachers Union who said, our babies might not have learned timetables, but they learned the meaning of the word resilience. Just insane things that are happening right now in the name of do we actually care about kids learning or not? I was in McMahon's confirmation hearing for a very, very long period of time between two professional wrestlers. So I kind of had to sit diagonally for 4 hours. And I was looking at the questions that the different members were asking. And almost every single question that came from a Democratic senator was about the bureaucracy. It's what's going to happen to these federal workers? What's going to happen to these officials in the states and the cities? Very few questions about the kids. And to me, that was really telling because at the end of the day, do we really care about the kids? They're only in the system for 12 years. Whereas the bureaucrats are there for life. And that was something that I found really kind of stomach churning.
Let me follow that up with what I think is a very difficult question. And I've asked it to a number of people. I've never gotten an answer. I don't have an answer myself. Maybe you do. Has the Department of Education ever done anything that's worth doing?
I think this has become obviously a very partisan issue right now, but for the most part, no. We look at even right now the fact that Trump is very robustly exercising his executive power to try and rein in civil liberties and injustices that he has perceived have taken place over the past couple of years. Has a school ever lost federal funding under Title IX? Actually, no. It's something that has been used to blackmail schools for a really long time. Under the Obama administration, it was threatened against the University of Montana because they had a sexual assault issue. And it was so scary, just the mere thought of losing federal funding, that it forced compliance among America's 4,000 colleges and universities, as well as the 13,500 school districts. And so schools made, I think what frankly, in retrospect, was a rational decision to sacrifice the First Amendment on the altar of Title IX. That achieved their political aims. In my mind, I think that's gross. Obviously, the Constitution trumps statutory things like that. But that was political expediency for them. And so we're watching the pendulum swing back the other way. And so we live in strange times.
For our listeners out there who are wondering why it is that every college in the United States has a federal funding issue, it's because it goes all the way down to student loans.
Yeah.
Every school, every college in the United States, I think, saved 3. Accepts student loans. So that means functionally every college is beholden to federal funding.
Yeah, and it's worse than that, James. It was part of I remember we talked about it back in the day. It was part of the Affordable Care Act. A line item in there took those student loans out of wherever they were and put them under the Department of Education. And I was terrified because I figured this is the foot in the door for the Department of Education to start dictating education policy to colleges and universities. They've done such a bang-up job on our primary and secondary schools.
Yeah. And so, this is as much, right now, obviously, we're sort of in the middle of this maelstrom around Harvard. But there are so many different ways and, pipelines of money into universities, and also to K-12 schools. I think back a couple years ago, the Biden administration threatened to withhold school lunch money. Literally food for poor children from school districts that refuse to implement their guidance document on Title IX. Guidance documents are non-binding. You ask any federal agency, right, and they sort of, when you pin them down in court, they're like, oh, no, it's just guidance, wink, wink. But The Biden USDA was fully prepared to rip food from poor children to make sure that there were non-binary bathrooms, which is, I think that's a lot. I think that's a stretch. But we're watching now with Harvard, right? It's the international students. It's the student loans. It's the research funding. It's, any one of the visas. It's any one of a zillion things. And so this is one of those, you reap the whirlwind because you have been sucking at the federal teat for so long, and it kind of sucks now. I didn't know if I was allowed to say teat, so it is.
You can say teat.
A biological term, but
you can say whatever you want.
It's me.
The other guy here. We got to watch.
I'm the one being censored.
You mentioned the NAEP scores, which I want to tell our listeners. NAEP is, I forget what the acronym is, NAEP, and these are the nationwide standardized tests.
Yeah,
and I haven't looked at the results for, good Lord, maybe 20 years. I used to do some research on it, but I can tell you from personal experience, is obvious to me in my last 10 years of teaching, that there's a decline, and not a small decline, but a gargantuan decline in the quality of student over the past 10 to 15 years. And I can only attribute that to what's being taught in the high schools.
Yes.
I hate to throw off the blame, but I'm talking about freshman students who come into my school, so has nothing to do with our university. They're coming fresh out of high school. We're admitting the same sorts of students we've always admitted, and yet the quality is so incredibly low. I don't know how they got into any college.
No, I think that's right. And I think it's across the board, right? It's reading, it's mathematics, it's science, it's kind of all of the disciplines, which is something that's scary. I mean, this year, a few weeks ago, it came out that Harvard is going to be introducing a remedial math class, which is something that is, right? I mean, you think how brilliant you have to be to get into Harvard. Their remedial math class is going to be a 5-day-a-week class for a full year. So it'll be both semesters, fall semester and spring semester. I was just curious. I ran the numbers. Base tuition at Harvard is $54,000 a year. So that's without all the, the bells and whistles and housing and all that stuff. So that's a quarter of your course load for your freshman year. That's $13,000 on a math class that you really should have known and taken in high school and been proficient at if you get into Harvard. I mean, I went to the University of Illinois. Of course, we're going to have a remedial math class, but Harvard, come on. And so I think it is really, across the board, students are just not being prepared, not only for college, but frankly for life in K-12. And so I think you're right to pass the blame down a little bit. And again, many schools are trying to pin all of this on COVID. Things were not great before COVID, right? I mean, this was a real toxic stew before that. And I think that was one of the things when I started Parents Defending Education was, I came up through Cato and everything. I grew up with the school choice good, teachers union bad kind of heuristic. And I didn't realize until I started looking into K-12 that there is this, education industrial complex. There is the blob of all of these the professional associations, the interest groups. There is so much going on because there is such a huge amount of federal money sloshing around. As a parent, when my kids had to be in, school would be closed for a teacher professional development day. You kind of assume that your teacher is there to do learn how to do phonics better or something. It's not. It turns out that a lot of the professional development it's gender stuff. It's regulatory stuff. It's kind of weird, privilege walk type stuff. It's not actually teaching teachers how to be better. In the meantime, since I have to pay $100 a kid for a babysitter that day, I'm not super thrilled. But schools have been filling up. You have our children for 8 hours a day. They're not actually learning for 8 hours a day. They're filling it with a lot of other weird garbage. And I have a boy, he's wiggly and has a ton of energy. My daughter has ADHD, same thing. The kids are not getting a lot of recess either. They're not getting an hour for lunch. They're getting a lot of weird, let's talk about our feelings and it's okay to sort of navel gaze. And I also think that is something that's really deeply unhelpful for kids because now many people view themselves as victims. And I think that also is something that doesn't set them up for success just in interactions with peers.
By the time they get to college, they're so indoctrinated in that way that if you challenge any belief that they hold, you're a villain.
Yeah. I'm wearing a Gulf of America shirt right now. And I was just had to drop my son at a Dungeons and Dragons thing in downtown DC this afternoon. I was like, oh my gosh, I might get assaulted on the street because it's funny because people assume that they can be surrounded by only what they like and they support and they believe all the time. Like, I don't freak out and punch people in the face when I see them wearing a Che Guevara shirt. I find it deeply offensive, but like, I can kind of hold my emotions in check. But we have not taught children or teens or young adults how to do that. And I can't imagine what it must be like to teach, because what I hear from professors, when I hear from teachers, is they're frightened of their students. They know that the kids understand the system and how to weaponize that and what words to say to, work something through the disciplinary hearing process, get extra time for tests. And, most teachers are not paid enough to deal with that. And then when you kind of throw in a lot of the discipline issues where everybody gets to sing Kumbaya, we're not going to actually enforce any real lines in the sand because we don't want people to feel bad about themselves. We don't want the school to prison pipeline to become a thing. You know what? If I'm paid $50,000 to be a math teacher, I'm there to teach math. I'm not there to be an emotional support dog, gender counselor, punching bag, all of those things. That's too much. And so I actually feel really bad for a lot of teachers that are being put in a terrible situation.
And yet a lot of them brought it on themselves, right? We have a bunch of teachers who can't stop emoting too.
Right. I think about that Thomas Sowell quote when he said, when he was a professor at Stanford, he had a student that came up to him at the end of some semester and said, "I don't know what you think." And he said, "That was my proudest moment as a professor." Now it's right. Like, I remember thinking when I was growing up that my teachers like lived in the school. And if you'd see them in the grocery store, it was super weird. Now your teachers, you have to know everything about them. Like so-and-so is like now going by this pronoun or got married or like, it's just like, it's not about you. It's about like teaching the third graders how to read. And like, this is what how a pupa becomes a butterfly kind of thing. It's not about you. It's like, it's all very weirdly narcissistic.
The emphasis on feeling, I think the problems go deeper than what you have described. Yes, the students seem fixated on their feelings, but in my experience, they start to rely on feelings as a tool. So I'm teaching statistics. I say, okay, here's data on this and data on this, and are they positively or negatively correlated? And I kid you not, every semester I'd have at least one student who would say to me, "Well, I feel that they're positively correlated." I say, there is no feeling here. There's calculations. You run the calculations. It is or it isn't. And that makes them very nervous because they somehow are tuned into using that as the go-to tool of how do I feel emotionally about this thing. As you're talking about $54,000 for Harvard, it suddenly occurred to me, we've gotten to this weird space that we're asking taxpayers to pay for public education. We're not delivering the quality that we were even delivering 10, 15 years ago. And with things like the remedial math that you're getting in Harvard, and you're getting that at other universities as well, I'm sure, in effect, parents are having to pay twice. As a parent, I've got to pay the tuition to have the university teach my kids things that they should have learned in high school, which means not only am I out of pocket for that, but in effect, if that takes, you said the remedial math is 2 semesters. If that takes a year, then really we're graduating people with 4-year degrees that are really only 3-year degrees.
Yes. And that is frightening because, college is the most expensive thing that anyone will ever most families will ever have to pay for, aside from their house. And so to be out of pocket, $80,000 for, look at Columbia, like for my child to not be able to enter the science building because a bunch of kids are having a temper tantrum about some foreign policy issue. What the heck is this? And I serve as a trustee on a public university board. And what has been fascinating to me as I have been digging into this is that there is no oversight. The systems, and I'm sure you guys have seen this from the inside, have been hijacked by faculty senates and by administrators where even something that is ostensibly supposed to serve as an oversight role, as a sort of fiduciary backstop. Being a trustee was described to me as you're a mushroom. They keep you in the dark and they feed you shit. And yes, we are expected to rubber stamp, but we are not supposed to ask any questions. The faculty senate, I just read our faculty handbook, usually allows themselves significant control over all different kinds of curriculum. Ours even said admissions, which horrified me. And so the inmates are very much running the asylum. And I don't know what to do with that.
In your organization, Parents Defending Education, I'm reading some background to it, and you say parents are frightened to speak out about their concerns about public education. What? Because if they did, that would solve a lot of the problem I think that we're seeing at the higher education level. Why are they afraid to speak out?
We have seen so many instances of people who are districts in particular that have really gone after families, where they will retaliate against a parent for speaking out. I mean, we had the whole instance in 2021 with the National School Boards Association sending the letter to the Biden administration, asking for federal oversight over school board matters, intended, frankly, to chill public participation and things like that. Parents were still mad about masking and school reopenings and what their kids were learning on Zoom school or weren't. But we have also heard stories of different of teachers retaliating against children as parents have tried to opt their kids out of, for say, like sexually explicit material. There's a Supreme Court case that's happening in the next couple days called Mahmoud v. Taylor with Montgomery County, Maryland, where it's actually a group of religious and Muslim families that said, we don't really want our kids to be learning all the really explicit gender things. And families are being, denied the opportunity to opt out. Or if a family does, the teachers will shame the kid and say, well, Johnny's mom doesn't want him to learn about this stuff, and so there is kind of that public pressure element. But I mean, in Scottsdale, Arizona, there was a superintendent that was keeping a dossier of families that spoke out and expressed dissent. It was just discovered because he kept an unsecured Google document. There was a district in Michigan that had to actually pay a woman $160,000 because they did get her fired from her job. I mean, so there's a lot of examples like that. And even, I talk to parents because we litigate under associational standing. And so when we sue a district, it's Parents Defending Education versus Arlington Public Schools. And so the families in our district are anonymous. But in talking to families, they say, I have a small business. If people decide that they're going to blackball us, we're going to lose our house. We'll be bankrupt. And so I think there actually are very real world reasons for people to not speak out, which is sad and tragic because we're at this weird kind of cancel culture moment in time still that I'm not sure when it will end. I would hopefully soon, but it's very dark at this moment.
So what's the answer? What if you could do anything, within reason to fix this problem? What would you do?
I do think there is a role for people to start to speak up. It's funny because we have people send us tips. We do public records. And then I am the bad guy. We're the ones who get the hate mail and the death threats, not like the parents who send us the stuff. But I want people to see that the sky doesn't collapse when you speak out. And in fact, it's actually kind of empowering. I think for the most part, Americans have their civic engagement muscles have atrophied. People have forgotten how to engage with each other constructively. If my neighbor has not mowed their grass, the solution is not for me to call the county and have, a cop come out and knock on their door. It's for actually me to go knock on the door and say hey dude, can you mow your grass? Or maybe I find out that he broke his leg and he can't do it and I help, right? But it doesn't have to involve the government, be it the federal government, the state government, the local government. We actually have to kind of learn to talk to each other and to tolerate positions with which we disagree. And that is not happening right now. And so, school board members, as we sort of look at the whole idea, kind of what we started with of, closing down the department, moving things, block granting things down to the states. Theoretically, moving things to the states will make education more responsive because those people at the state level have to run for election. Nobody at the Department of Education really is, they're not up for election. You don't have to run into them in the grocery store. But the state superintendent, the state board of education, the governor, your local school board members, they are people who really should take into account what you care about. One thing that I have kind of obsessed about for the past couple of years is there has been also massive consolidation in school districts. In 1919, there were about 13,000. No, there were about 141,000 school districts across the country. Fast forward to now, there's about 13,500. And so when you look at a district near me, Fairfax County, it's the 11th biggest school district in the country. They have a budget of $3 billion. They have 25,000 employees. That's a multinational corporation. That's insane. Of course, when you get up and do your 2-minute impassioned speech in front of the school board, they don't care. So I think, in my mind, there should be some things like that should be broken up, so that districts are smaller and they are more responsive. So that's kind of one of the things I have been thinking about.
I'm sorry, I'm blown away. $3 billion budget For a school district.
For a school district, right? And so you think about the volume of schools, the amount of, staff and just, federal grants and everything that's going through. That's like a lot. And so when you are hiring someone as a superintendent who has done 10 years and a PhD in an education school, that's, is that the right skill set for this job? Or do you need someone who was the CEO of McDonald's, who actually understands supply chains and things like that? I mean, to me, that actually is a more linear set of experiences than being somebody who has read a real lot of bell hooks.
What sorts of things right now is your organization working on?
We are working on, I think trying to keep an eye on what is happening with kind of all of the president's priorities, which are occupying a lot of bandwidth right now. The executive orders are not law. It kind of frames out the agenda of where the administration wants to go to. But I think, there is going to be, at this point, kind of the ball has been passed to Congress. There are laws that are going to need to be passed. There are rules and regulations that are going to need to be done through kind of the Federal Register and the notice and comment period. And so I think, that is kind of interesting to watch how these things are going to unfold. DC is kind of an interesting place right now because Congress is really not trying to lead on any of these issues. They're sort of trying to follow the president's signals. And so, where does that go? I mean, as we saw with kind of the Harvard letter and stuff, not all of the impulses are perfect. And so that is a problem in and of itself, because I think they're kind of undermining the goodwill that they rode into office on. So I feel like for the next couple of months, it's sort of hunting and killing mode to identify the different programs that are, in my mind, unconstitutional. So some of the Title VI violations where there has been flagrant discrimination on the basis of race, and national origin and sex, race, ethnicity, national origin, and Title IX as well, with the Biden administration's Title IX rule that had redefined the word sex to be gender. With the Biden rule paused indefinitely, we now revert to Betsy's rule from 2020. That still has some gaps in it. That has some due process issues that need to be remedied. And so that's something else that's going to need to be taken up. But we are seeing many, many districts, as well as many universities and state agencies that are saying, we don't believe the president's EOs. We don't like Betsy's Title IX rule. We're going to #resist. And so there's going to be a lot of showdowns about that. And I think something else that's kind of interesting is, even if a school wants to comply, the public university that I serve on seems to want to comply in good faith with the executive orders, because I do think there has been so much excess in, higher ed in particular, with a lot of the DEI stuff. I think a lot of universities and institutions kind of want to back away from that, and Trump can be the bad guy and the boogeyman and the reason for them doing it, but it sort of is what's in their hearts anyway. That's running head on into what state law is. That's why we're seeing this showdown with Maine right now. Maine, Illinois, California, they have included gender identity as a protected class in their states. A lot of states have minority contracting laws or DEI reporting requirements. And so all those state laws are going to have to be taken off the books as well. And so I have been cautioning people, dear God, don't hang your George Bush mission accomplished sign yet. There is a lot of stuff that has to happen before we get to where we need to go. I was at a university trustee board meeting a few weeks ago, or trustee meeting. It was a conference for trustees. And a lot of the advice that the speakers were giving attendees was just wait it out, just keep doing your inclusivity stuff. And so I think there is a non-zero number of people that are going to try and go underground and keep doing their discrimination, just sort of, taking the words off and say, it's the belonging department now, we're cool. And in my mind, they're the real bad actors, because I think, that's into, it's the mens rea. That's actually the guilty mind. They don't want to do what the right thing is to do, be it the morally correct thing or the constitutional thing. And so identifying that stuff, I think, is going to be something that's going to be very time consuming going forward.
While you were talking, I'm sorry, I couldn't get it out of my head. You said Fairfax County's school district budget is $3 billion. The city of Pittsburgh, the entire city of Pittsburgh, is 1/3 of that.
And still probably too much.
It's a mess. That's why there are so many consultants that are out there selling their services. There's a lot of money to be made selling curriculum. Even, you look at things like Southern Poverty Law Center has had curriculum for decades. They renamed it a couple of years ago. It used to be called Teaching Tolerance. Now I think it's Learning for Change. But they have tens of thousands of teachers in their network that have, lesson plans for every grade, handouts, assignment. There is this whole this whole business line of providing things to make it turnkey for teachers to just push these programs on kids. And no one had any idea. I think that is sort of the silver lining in a weird way of COVID, is that suddenly people had a window into what was happening in schools. Because, many of us dropped our kids at the schoolhouse gates and assumed that everything was fine and it was how it was when we grew up. And it certainly is not. And it has been dismaying, but I think it has given, a lot of people a reason to get involved in politics for the first time. So that has also been something that's been kind of interesting.
Nikki, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
I am so long-winded. I'm so sorry.
No, that's kind of perfect.
The more you talk, the less James talks.
And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.